According to The Bold and the Beautiful spoilers, viewers are obsessed with a significant plot hole involving Thomas Forrester. Why didn't Grace Buckingham ask Paris Buckingham's fiancé for help? Grace felt trapped since she was forced to repay Reese Buckingham's gambling debts. Grace was experiencing significant threats from bookies and scared for her girl's safety, so she pulled off the unthinkable, a phony tumor plot. Liam Spencer was tricked into believing he was dying of an inoperable brain mass, prompting Bill Spencer to wire $1 million for what he believed to be experimental surgery. In actuality, it was all a big fraud that has backfired on Grace now that the truth has been revealed. Grace consented to confess to the officers and was eventually given a ride to the police station by John Finnegan. If Grace's forecast is correct, she will lose her medical license and face prison time as a result of this catastrophe. That will hurt Paris and Zoe Buckingham, especially since their father is already serving time for his crimes. However, Grace could have avoided all of this if she had sought assistance from someone else. Viewers have complained on social media since Thomas was supposed to be Grace's initial call. According to supporters, Thomas is still Paris' future spouse, and he will go to any length to protect her, as well as her sister and mother. Paris, Zoe, and Grace were all endangered by the unrelenting bookies, therefore Thomas should have been notified. Thomas may not be as affluent as Dollar Bill, but he is from the wealthy Forrester family and might have predicted this for Grace. We have no doubt that Thomas would have moved mountains of money to assure Paris and her family's safety. Of course, there are two easy reasons why B&B did not focus on the Thomas angle in this plot. The first is that Thomas isn't on canvas, so having him play the hero wouldn't be very effective unless they wanted to bring him back. Another argument is that the show could not have pulled off the Liam tumor ruse. Grace needed Bill's money to tell this narrative, so we'll have to disregard the obvious Thomas plot hole that ensued. According to The Bold and the Beautiful spoilers, Bill will learn about the fake cancer news between August 11th and 15th, so don't miss his reaction. It began with a knock at the door to their small apartment on the outskirts of town. Thomas was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta, with steam curling over his glasses. Paris was splayed out on the couch, looking through her phone. Her boots rested against the armrest. The knock was harsh and forceful, unlike the casual tap of a neighbor. Thomas froze as the wooden spoon hovered over the pot. Paris' head snapped up and her gaze narrowed. "Don't answer it," she murmured quietly, already reaching for the switchblade she kept hidden in her boot. Thomas dried his hands with a dish towel, his heart racing. "Could be nothing," he murmured, but his voice lacked confidence. He approached the door, peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the knock returned, louder this time, rocking the frame. "Thomas, don't," Paris snarled, suddenly standing with the blade gleaming in her fingers. He disregarded her, his hand already on the doorknob. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the part of him that still believed in normalcy, in a world where a knock on the door did not indicate peril. He opened it just little, and that was plenty. The door slammed inward, taking Thomas off guard. He stumbled back as two guys in dark hoodies rushed in, moving with trained accuracy. One grabbed Thomas and pinned his arms before he could react. The other ran after Paris, who swung her sword in a wild arc, but the attacker was faster, knocking the weapon out of her grasp with a gloved punch. She struggled fiercely, striking a kick to the man's leg, but a second later, a cloth pushed over her face, reeking of chemicals. Her body went slack and her eyes rolled back. Thomas struggled, his yells muffled by a similar material that enveloped him. The last thing he saw was the wavering light of the kitchen bulb, before darkness engulfed him entirely. When Thomas awoke, his head throbbed as if someone had hammered it. His hands were bound behind him, and the rope cut into his skin. The air was wet and smelled of mildew and rust. He blinked, attempting to make sense of his surroundings. A basement, perhaps. Concrete walls with a solitary light hanging from a freight cable, generating jagged shadows. Paris was slumped in a chair across from him, her head tilted to one side and her dark hair matted on her cheek. She too was tied up, with scuffed boots and one missing. "Paris," Thomas said softly, his voice scratchy. She didn't move. He tried again, louder, his panic increasing. "Paris, wake up." Her eyelids fluttered open, and she appeared dazed, like a child waking from a bad dream. Her eyes hardened, and she tugged against her chains, stiffening her teeth. Where in the hell are we? She whispered, surveying the room. No idea, Thomas said, his mind racing. He tried to piece things together. The knock, the invaders, and the chemical-soaked cloths. This did not happen at random. Someone had planned it, and they knew just where to locate them. Before he could finish speaking, a door at the top of a decrepit stairway creaked open. Heavy footsteps descended deliberately and slowly. A man approached, his face hidden behind a ski mask, his build broad and powerful. He carried a folding chair and placed it up in front of them before sitting down, his hands folded casually as if preparing to talk the weather. You too, he snarled, his voice low and gravelly, have been sticking your noses where they don't belong. Paris spat on the ground. Screw you. Who are you? The man chuckled, unconcerned. It does not matter who I am. What's important is what you know. And who have you told? Thomas's gut wrenched. The secret. The one they discovered months before. The one that had transformed their lives into a paranoid maze. It was about Douglas, an old buddy who had disappeared without a trace. They discovered evidence, documents, emails, and a flash drive concealed in his apartment. That pointed to something significant. A network, perhaps. Corruption, money laundering, and worse. They weren't sure, but they'd been digging quietly and carefully. Or so they thought. We don't know anything, Thomas answered, his voice more composed than he felt. We're nobody. You've got the wrong people. The man tilted his head, assessing Thomas like a predator measuring his prey. Don't act dumb. It's offensive. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting through the gaps in the mask. Where is the drive? Paris snorted. What motivation? Do you suppose we are carrying a MacGuffin like in a lousy movie? The man did not take the bait. He stood and paced slowly, his boots booming on the concrete. You have one chance to make this easy. Tell me where it is and maybe you'll walk out. Lie to me and things get messy. Thomas's thoughts raced. Rather than a deliberate decision. The drive was concealed, stashed away in a safe deposit box under a phony name. They hadn't told anyone, not even Grace, their other friend who'd become caught up in the mess. Grace had been acting peculiar recently, distant and jumpy. Thomas had attributed it to stress, but now he was not so sure. Paris, Thomas said softly, staring at her. Don't. Shut up, she hissed, her gaze fixed on the man. We don't have your damn drive. Do you want it? Go seek for it yourself. The man stopped pacing and stared at her, his stillness more unsettling than his words. Then he nodded almost to himself and took a phone out of his pocket. He wrote something fast with his gloved fingers, then put it back inside his jacket. Fine, he said. We'll do this the hard way. He turned and walked up the stairs, the door slamming shut behind him. The latch clicked, leaving Thomas and Paris in the dim light of the lamp, the air thick with the threat of worse to come. Grace sat in her car, parked in an empty lot, her hands quivering on the wheel. Her phone buzzed again, and the screen displayed another message from an unknown number. Keep your mouth shut, or they're dead. A photograph was sent, showing Thomas and Paris chained to chairs, their features pale and drawn. Grace's breath caught, and her vision blurred with tears. She had been receiving these messages for weeks, each one twisting the knife deeper. The blackmailer was well versed in her background, faults, and survival strategies. They had promised to ruin her and expose her if she didn't do what they wanted. She had not intended for things to go this far. At first it was only minor favors. Passing on information, keeping an eye on Thomas and Paris. She'd assured herself it was innocuous, that remaining close would protect them. But then Douglas vanished and the pressures increased. They had said, hand over the drive. Betray your buddies or lose everything. Grace had not seen Douglas in months. He'd dragged them all into this with his wild theories and irresponsible digging. He'd always been the dreamer, believing he could conquer the world and win. But now he was gone, and Grace couldn't get the notion that he wasn't simply missing but had died. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. You've got 24 hours. Get the motivation or they'll pay for your failure. Grace's hands tightened on the wheel, turning her knuckles white. She wasn't sure where the drive was. Thomas and Paris had been guarded, maintaining their own secrets, and she hadn't pressed. Maybe she should have. Perhaps she could have prevented this. She started the car, her head filled with remorse and terror. She needed to uncover that motivation, or at least learn what Thomas and Paris knew. But every action she made felt like another step into a trap, and the blackmailer's shadow grew greater with each passing hour. Back in the basement, Paris was twisting her ropes, her fingers raw from the coarse strands. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice strained with frustration. "This guy's not bluffing." Thomas nodded, his wrists throbbing from testing his ties. "Do you think this is about Douglas? What did he find?" "Of course it is," Paris replied, her eyes sparkling. "He had a tremendous idea, and it cost him his life. They are currently tidying up loose ends." "Us?" Thomas gulped hard. He'd assumed Douglas' disappearance wasn't random, but seeing Paris say it aloud confirmed it. "Grace!" he exclaimed unexpectedly. "She's been acting weird lately. What do you think?" Paris' hands remained still. "Do you think she is in on this?" "I don't know," Thomas said. "But she's been absent. Distant. As if she's hiding something." Paris swore beneath her breath. "If she sold us out?" "Don't jump to conclusions," Thomas remarked, his misgivings mounting. "We have to focus. Get free, find the drive, and figure out who's behind this." The ropes around Paris' wrists loosened somewhat, and she clenched her teeth, pushing through the pain. "Easier said than done," she mumbled. But her eyes were filled with resolve, and Thomas knew she wasn't going to stop until they got out, or until the man in the mask returned. Grace drove into the city, the neon lights fading past her windows. She wasn't sure where to begin, but she couldn't sit still. The blackmailer's texts were like a ticking clock, with each one counting down to a moment she couldn't stand to think about. She considered going to the police, but the blackmailer had made it clear. One word to the cops and they're dead. Furthermore, her own secrets bound her hands. She was far from innocent. Her thoughts strayed to Douglas. He had always been the glue, the one who held their small group together despite their differences. Thomas's overthinking, Paris's recklessness, and Grace's guarded heart had all relied on Douglas' optimism, his hope that they could make a difference. However, that belief had brought him into difficulties, and it was now pulling them apart. She stopped into a petrol station, her hands trembling as she checked her phone again. There were no fresh communications, but the photograph of Thomas and Paris remained, etched into her memory. She had to do something, but every option seemed like a dead end. Her only leverage was the drive, but finding it required her to betray her friends even more than she already had. In the basement, Paris finally slipped one hand free, her flesh scratched raw but triumphant. "Got it," she said quietly, quickly untying her other hand. She moved to Thomas and worked on his ropes with rapid practice movements. "Where did you learn how to do that?" Thomas asked, wincing as the rope slipped away. "Long story," Paris said, her tone harsh. "Let's just say I've been in worse situations than this." They stood, their legs unsteady but their will strong. The door at the top of the stairs was locked, but Paris was already looking about for anything useful, such as a loose pipe or a lost tool. Thomas checked the turns, his heart racing. They did not have much time. "Over here," Paris said, her voice low. She had discovered a rusting crowbar sitting against a stack of crates. She hefted it, assessing its weight, and nodded at Thomas. "This'll do." They crept up the steps as silently as they could. The door was strong, but the lock was old and flimsy. Paris inserted the crowbar into the opening and leaned in, her muscles straining. The wood splintered, and with one final heave, the lock gave way. They stepped into a tiny hallway where the air was cooler but no less oppressive. The home was silent, but that did not imply they were alone. Paris grabbed the crowbar tighter, her gaze darting to every shadow. Thomas followed, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. They needed to find a way out, but they also wanted answers. Who was the man behind the mask? What did he want from the drive? And where was Douglas? Grace's phone vibrated again as she sat in the gas station parking lot. Another message. "You are running out of time. Don't try me." She texted back, her fingers trembling. "I'm trying. I do not know where it is." The response came almost immediately. "You'd better figure it out, or they perish." Grace's breath tightened. She couldn't keep doing this or playing their game. But what options did she have? She imagined Thomas and Paris chained up somewhere, afraid and possibly hurt. And Douglas vanished without a trace. The weight of everything pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. She started the car again, her destination unknown, but her resolve strengthened. She'd find the motivation or a method to fight back. In any case, she had had enough of being a pawn. Paris and Thomas walked through the old two-story home, which smelled of dust and neglect. Every creak of the floorboards set their nerves on edge, yet they persisted, motivated by the need to leave and the prospect of finding answers. They discovered a rear door, half hidden behind a mound of broken furniture, and slid out into a weed-infested garden. The night air was chilly and stinging against their bare skin. They didn't pause to regain their breath, going quickly through the yard and into an alley. The city loomed around them, its lights far away yet promising shelter. They needed to withdraw and regroup, but first they needed to figure out who was after them. And why? Do you believe Grace is involved? Thomas inquired as they slipped into the shadows of a garbage. Paris' jaw stiffened. I do not know. But if she is, she has a lot to answer for. They strolled through the alleys quietly, their thoughts racing with questions. Douglas' abduction, the drive, and the blackmailer were all linked, and they had only just begun to disentangle the connection. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the man in the mask was waiting, his plans far from complete. The narrative continued, winding into the city's underbelly, where secrets festered and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Thomas and Paris would keep running and battling, their friendship challenged but unbreakable. Grace would struggle with her guilt, her decisions drawing her deeper into a world she had never intended to be a part of. The shadow of Douglas's disappearance would linger over them all, a reminder of the cost of truth in a lie-filled society. The drive was still there, either as a key to unlocking everything or as a bomb capable of destroying everything. The blackmailer's grip strengthened, but so did their determination. It was far from over. Paris' mother, Grace Buckingham, is a watchful and pragmatic woman who frequently intervenes in her daughter's life to safeguard her safety. Paris' fiancé, at the time of the tale, is a key player in her life, usually presented as dependable, resourceful, and sincerely invested in Paris' happiness. The plot hole in question occurs when Grace, aware of Thomas Forrester's problematic conduct or influence over Paris, fails to seek assistance from Paris' fiancé, despite his proximity, resources, and emotional involvement in Paris' safety. The precise scenario is likely centered on Thomas's obsessive tendencies, which have historically built divisions between characters and created dramatic tension. For example, Thomas's obsession with women like Hope Logan, or his unscrupulous ways to achieve love or professional goals, could have put Paris in jeopardy, causing Grace's alarm. The issue arises. Why would Grace, a heroine marked by her protective impulses, ignore Paris' fiancé, who would seem to be a natural ally in dealing with Thomas's behavior? A plot hole arises when a narrative aspect contradicts the story's established logic, character motives, or world building, resulting in a gap that undermines the audience's suspension of disbelief. In this scenario, the plot flaw stems from Grace's inaction, her failure to enlist Paris' fiancé's assistance when dealing with Thomas Forrester. This omission feels out of character for Grace, whose major aim is to shield Paris from emotional, professional, and bodily harm. Paris' fiancé, as a supportive partner with insider knowledge of Forrester creations and the broader social circle, would be a natural choice for partnership in challenging Thomas's behavior. Several things may lead to this narrative gap. First, Grace's decision-making process may not have been completely explored on film, leaving viewers to conjecture as to her reasons. Second, the show's tempo and emphasis on other storylines may have overshadowed this reasonable course of action in favor of more dramatic developments, such as direct confrontations or emotional impact. Third, the authors may have neglected the fiancé's role due to the difficulty of managing several characters and plotlines, which is common in soap operas with huge casts. Grace may have misgivings about Paris' fiancé, either because of his previous behavior, his relationship to the Forrester family, or her assumption that he will not manage the matter successfully. For example, if the fiancé is Carter Walton, Grace may see his commitment to Forrester creations as a conflict of interest, considering Thomas's important position in the company. Similarly, if the fiancé is then Forrester Dominguez, Grace may perceive him as too connected to the Forrester family, jeopardizing his capacity to act against Thomas. Desire to protect Paris' connection. Grace may avoid involving the fiancé in order to insulate Paris' romantic connection from the stress of confronting Thomas. Bringing the fiancé into a complicated disagreement may cause stress between him and Paris, especially if Paris is unaware of or minimizes Thomas's troublesome behavior. Grace, cognizant of Paris' emotional commitment in her engagement, may choose to handle the situation separately in order to protect her daughter's happiness. Personal agency and control. Grace is distinguished by her proactive, hands-on approach to issue solutions. She may assume that she alone can control Thomas's influence, either because she is confident in her own persuasive powers, or because she wants to avoid worsening the matter by involving others. This is consistent with her predisposition to take affairs into her own hands, even if it means ignoring rational allies. Lack of awareness. It is likely that Grace is unaware of her fiancé's ability to assist. If Grace is not expressly informed of the fiancé's wealth, influence, or willingness to face Thomas in the story, her refusal to turn to him may be due to a lack of information.